I suspect that this is really unconstitutional, kind of against property rights.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, that's the Multi-Housing Association. This has been, I talked with them last week, to get a kind of where are we with the enforcement. Their take is we're watching this, and if they come after landlords too aggressively, if they try to push this too aggressively, then that helps our case and we can litigate it. But they haven't done that yet. So, if they start to, as they've done in Minnesota, to claim doing a credit check is an act of discrimination, well, okay, that will end up getting litigated. Because also the fact that we fought this has forced the politicians to go on the record and say, no, that's not what we're doing here. Even though we know the activists who wrote the legislation, that's totally what they wanted to do. The value, we lost this battle, but at the same time, we made Olszewski and every other politician that's pushing this basically say a lot of things that will limit the way courts can interpret it in the future.
I often think, I thought today that you could compare this to the bakers who have gone to court over not baking a cake.
Right.
People. But on property rights again, about the Kelo decision.
Yeah.
So I think it's a really stronger property rights case than has ever been made.
Yeah, I mean, and this is my point to the Multi-Housing Association, and if I were in this situation, I would take the HUD lease addendum and try to negotiate. I mean, can you actually negotiate with HUD? I don't think you can practically. You'll hit a brick wall pretty quickly. But if it's not about the point is it's not actually income. If it were actually income, then we wouldn't be having this conversation. You wouldn't need this bill, and also the activists would have a legitimate point. But it's not income. It's this government bureaucracy, and the activists know this. They just want to force you to comply with the government bureaucracy, and they won't say that. They're a little disingenuous about that, so they create this term "source of income discrimination," which is a complete falsehood. Somebody, in fact, is going to litigate this if they have a good case, which is.
Before I ask the next question, there is a comment, not a question, by Mark. Montgomery County versus Glenmont Hills, Fourth Section 8 litigation.
That's the 80s case, right?
I don't know. It doesn't say a year on it.
I think that's the one that went to the Maryland Court of Appeals. And it was, they basically said, well, it's not that big of an administrative burden, really. So it doesn't constitute a taking where they're taking your property. However, if the facts change, then it might constitute a taking. So they ruled against the landlord, but they ruled against him while holding the door open to a new case. And that's the multi-housing guys. I haven't read that case, but the multi-housing guys have, and they think they know where the line is. I know they have a few members who are kind of eager to litigate something, but they want to litigate and win, so they need the government to actually take some hostile action.
Here's a follow-up to that. Could litigation be initiated that could try to prove that property values decrease as a result of Section 8? Could property values decrease?
It's a sovereign immunity. It's an impact of a policy, but government makes policies all the time that increase and decrease property values, and it doesn't. And the Supreme Court's ruled, I don't know the precise decision, but the doctrine right now is that, almost any regulation, unless it constitutes a total taking, is permissible and you don't get compensated.
I'm a district candidate for District 7 in Baltimore City, and you mentioned the demographic. What's the demographic of people in Section 8? You said nationwide. What are they locally?
Yeah, I said, this is one nationwide. It's a plurality of white recipient. Locally, I don't know what the specific breakdown is. the Section 8 program here in Baltimore is a descendant of, it's basically, we've pursued a federal policy of trying to shut down, the high-rise public housing projects, which were a total disaster, and turn them into vouchers. And in Baltimore, the high-rise public housing projects, were something like 95% African American. So as a result of that, and I think we peaked at like 18,000 public housing units, which was, as a percent of population, more than any place else in the country. It was a poor policy decision by Baltimore City to go so far into public housing. But now we're down to like 10,000. So that means about 7,000 of those have been voucherized, turned into vouchers. And that dictates the demographics in, really probably all of Maryland. I don't know beyond that. I mean, the specifics.
Thank you, Christopher.
But nationwide, this is one of the things you say. I mean, people here say this all the time. Well, landlords don't want to take Section 8 because they're racist. But if you look nationally, landlords also don't want to take Section 8, and it's a plurality of white people. So, I mean, that just doesn't make any sense. Also, everyone who knows the landlords knows that they'll take whoever's paying. If the federal government is paying, they have to have a really good reason not to take that money.
What are the qualifications to be on Section 8?
It's a very, like I said, it's a very opaque system. I mean, in terms of the wait list and how that's administered, I have no idea. I know there are ways to jump it. If you're in an emergency, if you're, they'll put you up in a hotel and you can kind of jump the queue to get into Section 8. But it's, basically being disabled is a plus. There's a whole set of criteria, and how it works out at any given point is opaque, and I honestly don't know. All I know is they keep saying there's a 9-year waiting list.
What about
I think all of us should probably get on that waiting list in case tragedy befalls us sometimes in the next nine years.
What about marriage? Does that disqualify you?
Not per se, but it causes you to have to include that person's income, which probably de facto disqualifies.
Right.
This is the Great Society welfare. It's the criteria are the same. It's a Great Society welfare state criteria, which is very hostile to marriage, very supportive of single parenthood. And that hasn't changed. It's a fundamental of the system. So, and you can't change it because it's part of the dogma of the left of the Democratic Party is immutable, that we have to do this.
Christopher also commented that the Great Society programs, I always say this too, have not been a leg up, but they've kept people in poverty for generations.
Yeah.
I think it creates poverty in the African American community. I'm running as a Republican. It's an awful program that creates poverty in the African American community.
Are you African American yourself?
Yes, ma'am, I am.
Every person who I have asked, and it's only anecdotal, thinks that the entire Great Society programs have really, really hurt the Black population. And those are working Blacks.
I'll tell you, my uncle was a social worker in Garrett County. So, that's Garrett County. And, he has the same comment, and he eventually retired after 20 years and said he got into this because he wanted to help people, and in reality he just became a clerk for the welfare state. But the programs suck a lot of the life out of people, and it really isn't racial. It's just as true in Garrett County as it is Baltimore City. I mean, we can all kind of empathize with if the government pays for your house, and they pay for your food, and they give you a cell phone, it's like, and then they tell you you're going to lose 40% of your benefits, for every dollar you earn above board. Well, that's tough. I mean, it starts to convince you that, hey, maybe I should work under the table. Maybe I should, all of which are not necessarily good steps for getting yourself out of poverty. So
freedoms for free rent. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
There was a related thing on the other side of it, is that those investors in Section 8, could they be interested because it's guaranteed money and maybe more than the usual rent? On the other hand, I mean, does this encourage them to have Section 8 properties while regular houses in those areas would have wind up with lower values because perhaps the Section 8 renters may be actually worse than people move about. They'll sometimes move into somebody else's property.
I mean, I'll tell you, the big issue, I think, and I'm not in like a scientific sort of analysis, is you create an economic incentive for people to come into neighborhoods that no investor would, look at buying single family homes in Essex. Like, why wouldn't you just buy an apartment building or buy, do something? So what it does is it takes that neighborhood in Essex or any, working class or middle class neighborhood, and it converts it. It speeds the conversion from owner occupied to tenants. And that's the big issue. Once you get in and you hit a tipping point where, you're below 50% owner occupied, and all of a sudden it's not so much a neighborhood, it's more of a, it loses its character, and landlord, no, even a good landlord is not going to be as good as a good homeowner, in terms of keeping up their property and creating a sense of community, and it's a lot of the intangibles that tie a neighborhood together. Lower cost neighborhoods is the Section 8 houses are actually nicer than the people who have worked all their lives and have bought a house in any. You'll get granite countertops, you'll get nice kitchen appliances, because the money's there. I mean, if you can earn a 20% investment.
Let's say, why should a person pay for his own stuff? Blair made that comment into a question. Don't a lot of individuals, they don't have any ambition to really make it on their own with a true leg up.
Yeah. It's bad incentives, and changing it, you're dealing with, the only way to change is at the federal level, and you have such gridlock. And quite frankly, the Republicans are not taking a charge. I mean, we kind of don't want to deal with this issue. It's like to fundamentally reform that. You get called all sorts of names. You don't care about people. You don't. You're trying to throw people out on the street. If you try to fundamentally reform the rules by which these programs operate, even if you're not trying to save any actual money in the federal budget, you just want to redesign it. It's a heavy lift, and the Democrats don't want to support it. So, why are you going to take that heavy lift if it's something that's possibly it's going to be a challenge anyway?
Yeah, and how do you trim government? What they have no incentive either.
Right.
So what we need to do is create incentives or demands, perhaps, for these things to change responsibly. I mean, we used to be a country where we were all type A individuals, or almost all. We had the attitude that that you could climb the ladder and not stay at the bottom.
And one thing I'd say, regarding, we have an issue here in Towson. So related to this is the construction of new low-income housing, which, isn't necessarily Section 8. I mean, but practically it often becomes that. And I mean, we have one project here in Towson, and of course, they're dropping it in East Towson, which is the historic African-American neighborhood, because that's where they can get away with it. I mean, this is, people talk about social justice. I mean, this has not helped African-American communities. The whole public housing project, I mean, it's destroying a huge amount of equity in neighborhoods. I mean, I did a back of the envelope calculation. I mean, it's a couple $1 billion in wealth, that was held predominantly by African-American families who own property in the surrounding neighborhoods that was just totally destroyed by Baltimore's public housing. You never hear anyone talk about that on the left. I mean, that was their policy.
We've gone just about an hour, so we really need to wind this up.
Okay.
Any last things you'd like to say?
No, I mean, I guess, of course, I always want to say stuff. I mean, I guess the big thing is, this is one battle in a long war, and we all need to stay involved, stay in touch, and follow what the next steps are, because they're not stopping here. I mean, this whole social engineering thing, and these guys are basically Marxists. They believe that everybody should get a house from the government, and it should be allocated by whatever criteria need or whatever. I mean, it's they're not going to stop with this one act, which probably they may or may not actually give them what they want. They're going to keep going. So they've been doing this since 1994, playing the long game, and we need to do the same, and really just tie it to this is crime and taxes for Baltimore County. This is what they're doing.
It's a form of socialism, but Christopher Anderson made a comment, the last comment. It's the last comment of the hour.
Okay.
He said Republicans haven't fought hard enough. And I think he didn't say they chicken out, but he just said they get labeled bigots, which is what happens to them.
Yeah, absolutely.
Labels.
No, and I'll tell you, Johnny O got elected here. He went over to the West Side, and he told people on the West Side, they deal with more Section 8 than people in Towson, and they don't like it. And he told them, I'm not going to bring more Section 8 into Baltimore County. I'm going to deconcentrate it and move it. I'm going to take it from you and give it to somebody else. And that worked. So if he had actually argued what he's actually doing, it probably would have met with some more opposition. So
we're seeing it almost all over the place inside the Beltway and outside the Beltway now too. And we've seen the carjackings, the home robberies, and everything else. And I was told by a former sheriff that it was Section 8. Flat out.
So anybody that wants to work on Freedom of Information Act requests, drop me a line, and we can get the data that will conclusively prove that. But
tell them how
major effort that will take a long time, because you got to get from HUD through Freedom of Information Act requests, and we'll have to get Andy Harris involved. I mean, it's a big pain.
Tell them how they can reach you, Steve.
You can Steve at Capital Street Partners. One word, capital with an A, street spelled out, partners.com.
He's done a lot of study on this. So I want to thank everybody on behalf of the Republican Women of Baltimore County. We're proud to be able to put on these webinars, even though at the moment we can't do them in person. I can hardly wait to be able to shake hands and hug again